Okay, real talk. You're either holding a drink right now, you just finished one, or you're thinking about one. No judgment. Zero judgment. In fact, stick around because by the end of this video, you're going to feel a lot better about that glass in your hand. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. When you cracked open that beer, poured that wine, mixed that cocktail, you didn't just do a normal Tuesday night thing. You performed a ritual that is older than language, older than the wheel, older than fire, arguably. You just did something that predates humans as a species entirely. Let that sink in for a second. Not predates America, not predates the Roman Empire, predates Homo sapiens. Before there was a you, before there was an us, there was already a species out there in a forest, actively seeking out the exact sensation you get from that drink in your hand right now. So tonight, we're going on a trip. We're going back, way back, 10 million years back, to a forest floor in Africa, and we're going to trace a single, unbroken thread, one impulse, one craving, all the way from a rotting piece of fruit to a Bud Light, to the reason human beings decided to stop wandering around and build actual civilization. Yeah, I said it, civilization. Because there's a real, serious argument from actual scientists, not barstool philosophers, that we didn't start farming because we wanted bread. We started farming because we wanted to get buzzed. Bread was basically a side quest. Stick with me because this is one of those stories where every layer you peel back gets weirder than the last one. The drunk monkey theory. Let's start at the very beginning, before humans, before apes even looked like apes. Picture a forest floor, warm, humid, and on that forest floor is fruit that's fallen off the trees and just sat there a few days, a week. Nobody's picking it up because there's no somebody yet, not the way we mean it. But that fruit isn't just sitting there doing nothing. The sugar inside it is breaking down. Wild yeast, which is everywhere by the way, it's basically airborne, gets into that fruit and starts throwing a party. Fermentation kicks in. And fermentation at the most basic chemical level produces alcohol, ethanol, the same stuff that's in your drink tonight. Now here comes our ancestor, small, furry, definitely not paying the mortgage. And it finds this piece of fermented fruit and eats it because, hey, free food. And something happens. It feels different, a little looser, a little happier. It has zero idea why. It just knows, this felt good, and I want to feel that again. In 2014, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley put a name to this. He wrote a book called The Drunken Monkey, and his theory is honestly one of the most fascinating things I've ever read. He argues that over literally millions of years, primates that were drawn to that faint alcoholic smell, the smell of ripe, fermenting fruit, were more successful at finding food than the ones who weren't. Think about it like a smoke alarm, except it's built backwards. Instead of warning you away from something, it's pulling you towards something valuable. That faint whiff of fermentation was basically nature's way of putting a neon sign over the best, ripest, most calorie-dense food in the forest. And the primates who were wired to chase that sign, they ate more, survived more, and passed that wiring down. So here's the wild part. We didn't learn to like alcohol. We were built to like it. By the time actual human beings show up on the evolutionary timeline, the craving is already fully installed. It's not a bug. It's not a modern weakness. It is, quite literally, a 10 million-year-old feature. Which raises an obvious question. If the taste was already built in that far back, when did somebody finally figure out how to make the stuff on purpose instead of just getting lucky with rotten fruit? That answer takes us to a cave, and it's going to break almost everything you assume about how civilization started. So here's how we're all taught the story of civilization, right? Humans wander around as hunter-gatherers for a while. Then one day, somebody has a light bulb moment, plants a seed, invents farming. Farming leads to surplus food. Surplus food leads to villages. Villages lead to writing, government, the pyramids, Wi-Fi, all of it. And somewhere way down that list, almost as an afterthought, humans figure out fermentation and go, oh neat, we can make a fun drink now too. Alcohol comes after civilization. That's the story. That's what basically every textbook implies. Except in 2018, a group of archaeologists was digging in a cave near Haifa, Israel, called Rockfet Cave, and they found something that just doesn't fit that timeline at all. Inside the cave were stone mortars, basically carved-out bowls in the bedrock, that had been used by a group called the Natufians about 13,000 years ago. When scientists analyzed the residue stuck inside those mortars, they found the leftover chemical signature of wheat and barley that had been deliberately soaked, allowed to germinate, and left to ferment. That's beer. Beer brewed in a cave 13,000 years ago. Here's why that number should make your jaw drop. The Natufians were not farmers. They hadn't invented agriculture. There was no growing barley yet. They were walking around collecting wild grain by hand and hunting whatever they could catch. These were full-blown nomadic hunter-gatherers. And somehow, in the middle of that survival mode lifestyle, they carved dedicated stone equipment into a cave floor specifically to make alcohol. Think about the logistics of that for a second. These aren't people with a fridge and a Tuesday afternoon to kill. These are people whose entire day is built around, how do we not starve? And they still carved out the time, the tools, and the effort to brew beer. That's not a hobby, that's a priority. So the old story, farming first, beer as a bonus later, might have it exactly backwards. And Rockvet Cave isn't even the wildest example. About 1,000 years after that, in southeastern Turkey, a group of nomadic people built something that, for decades, made zero sense to archaeologists. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and it is, as far as we know, the oldest monumental structure ever built by human hands. We're talking massive, carved stone pillars, some over 10 tons, arranged in deliberate circles, decorated with detailed carvings of animals. This is Stonehenge-level engineering, except Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by thousands of years. And here's the part that broke archaeologists' brains. It was built before farming, before pottery, before permanent houses. The people who built it didn't have a home to go back to. They were still hunter-gatherers, wandering, hunting, foraging. So the question became, why would nomadic people who have zero spare time, who are working every single day just to eat, organize the manpower to drag 10-ton stones up a hill and carve them with precision? What's worth that kind of effort when you don't even have permanent shelter? Then they found the vats, big stone vats at the site, and when researchers tested the residue inside, they found chemical traces of fermented grain. Not a little bit either, enough to suggest large-scale brewing, the kind meant for big groups, not one guy having a nightcap. The leading theory now is that Göbekli Tepe wasn't a village. It wasn't a home. It was a destination, a gathering place built for ritual and feasting, where people from scattered groups across the region would travel, sometimes real distances, to come together, celebrate, and drink. Picture that. Before the wheel, before writing, before anyone had a permanent address, humans were already organizing the ancient equivalent of a festival, and beer was the reason people showed up. Beer before bread. This pattern, beer showing up suspiciously early, before farming should logically exist, leads us to one of the most genuinely debated questions in all of archaeology. Why did humans start farming in the first place? The textbook answer is food security. Farming meant a stable, plannable food supply instead of gambling on whatever you could hunt or forage that week. Sounds logical, very sensible, very boring. But there's a guy named Patrick McGovern, widely considered the leading expert on the ancient history of alcohol on the planet, who has spent literal decades building a different case. His argument, in short, humans didn't domesticate grain to make bread, they domesticated it to make beer. And when you actually break down the logic, it's hard to argue with. Bread is complicated. You have to grind the grain into flour, mix it, knead it, shape it, then figure out fire management to bake it properly without burning it. That's a whole skill tree. Beer, by comparison, is almost embarrassingly easy. You soak grain in water, you leave it alone. Wild yeast does the rest, completely on its own, no supervision required. It's the laziest recipe in human history, and it produces something that gets you a little bit drunk. So which one do you think was the original motivation for a species that already had a 10-million-year-old, evolutionarily hardwired craving for that exact fermented buzz? A labor-intensive bread-making process, or an add water and wait recipe for the thing your brain has been chasing since before you were technically human? McGovern's answer, and honestly, mine too, is that the craving came first, and the farming was invented to feed the craving. Bread was the consolation prize. If that's true, it means something genuinely staggering. Agriculture, arguably the single event that made human civilization possible, might exist because a bunch of hunter-gatherers really wanted to get a buzz on a regular basis. We didn't build civilization and then discover drinking. We may have started building civilization to keep the drinks coming. The world's oldest recipe. So we've established that the craving is ancient, 10 million years ancient, and that the practice of deliberate brewing goes back at least 13,000 years to people who didn't even have farming yet. But at some point, leave grain in water and hope for the best had to evolve into something more intentional, something you'd actually call a recipe. That moment shows up around 7000 BCE in a Neolithic village in central China called Jiahu. Archaeologists digging there found pottery jars, and when they ran chemical analysis on the residue coating the inside, they didn't just find old beer. They found a genuine blended beverage, a mix of rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries, all fermented together. Sit with that combination for a second. This isn't someone accidentally letting fruit rot in a jar. This is a recipe. Rice for the base, honey for sweetness and extra fermentable sugar, grapes and hawthorn berries for flavor, and probably to kick off fermentation faster with their natural yeasts. Someone experimented. Someone tasted a bunch of failed batches, made adjustments, and landed on a formula worth repeating. This is, as far as we can currently confirm, the oldest known alcoholic recipe on Earth. Not the oldest alcohol, we've already gone back further than that, but the oldest evidence of someone treating it like a craft, like a product. 9,000 years ago, somebody in central China was essentially running a one-person microbrewery, and they were good enough at it that we can still chemically reconstruct their ingredient list today. Think about that next time you're standing in a liquor store overwhelmed by choice. The impulse to mix, tweak, and perfect a drink recipe is not a modern craft cocktail trend. It's a 9,000-year-old human instinct. When beer became a whole civilization's operating system. Now let's fast forward to the point where alcohol stops being a ritual curiosity and becomes something much bigger, the literal infrastructure of a society. Welcome to ancient Egypt. If you think your relationship with beer is committed, ancient Egypt is going to humble you. Beer in Egypt wasn't a treat. It wasn't a Friday night thing. It was woven into essentially every mechanism that kept society functioning. Let's start with the pyramids, because this fact tends to break people's brains. The laborers who built the pyramids, the actual guys hauling and stacking limestone blocks in brutal desert heat, were paid in beer. Not tipped in beer, paid. We're talking somewhere around 4 to 5 liters a day as part of their actual wages, alongside bread. And before you picture a bunch of drunk guys stumbling around dropping stone blocks on each other, this wasn't about getting hammered on the job. There's real logic here, and it's kind of brilliant. First, water safety. The Nile was the water source, and Nile water was frequently contaminated, full of bacteria and parasites that could make you seriously sick. Beer, because of the brewing process, involved boiling and fermentation, both of which kill off a lot of that nasty stuff. So beer was, functionally, safer to drink than the water. It was purified hydration before anyone understood germ theory. Second, calories. Brewing doesn't just produce alcohol, it retains a ton of nutrients and calories from the grain. For a laborer dragging multi-ton limestone blocks across the desert in 100-plus-degree heat, that daily beer ration wasn't a beverage, it was a meal. It was functioning as lunch. So really think about what's happening here. One drink is simultaneously somebody's paycheck, their water filtration system, and a chunk of their daily caloric intake. That's an absurd amount of a society's basic needs being handled by a single product. And then there's the religious layer, because of course there is. The Egyptians believed beer was a literal gift from the god Osiris to humanity. It wasn't just something you drank casually. It showed up in temple offerings. It was part of burial rituals meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife. And it even had a role in medicine. Egyptian doctors would mix herbs and other ingredients directly into beer and prescribe it for everything from stomach issues to infections, essentially using it as a delivery system for medicine, the ancient version of take this with food. So stack it all up, one drink, doing the job of a paycheck, a water filter, a meal, a medicine cabinet, and a prayer, all from the same cup in the same civilization that gave us the pyramids. We tend to think of beer today as the fun part of life, the reward after the real work is done. In Egypt, it wasn't separate from survival. It basically was survival, dressed up as a drink. And that thread, from a rotting fruit on a forest floor, to a cave in Israel, to 10-ton stones in Turkey, to a 9,000-year-old recipe in China, to an entire economy running on it in Egypt, is about to bring us right back to you, holding that glass right now. So let's zoom all the way back out, because I want you to actually see the whole shape of this story at once, not just the individual pieces. 10 million years ago, before there was a you, before there was even a human, a small primate on a forest floor in Africa got drawn to the smell of rotting fruit. And that single preference, repeated across millions of years and millions of individuals, wired an entire lineage of animals to seek out fermentation. That's us. That's the starting line. 13,000 years ago, people who hadn't even invented farming yet were carving dedicated equipment into cave floors just to brew beer, prioritizing alcohol production while they were still figuring out how to survive week to week. 12,000 years ago, give or take, a group of nomads with no permanent homes organized the labor to move 10-ton stones up a hill, not to live there, not to farm there, but, as far as we can tell, to throw the ancient world's first known festival, fueled by vats of fermented grain. 9,000 years ago, someone in central China wasn't just fermenting grain and hoping for the best. They had a recipe: rice, honey, grapes, hawthorn berries. Precision, craft, the instinct to refine and perfect applied to alcohol 9,000 years before craft beer became a marketing term. And 5,000 years ago, an entire civilization, the one that built the pyramids, one of the most awe-inspiring architectural feats in human history, was quite literally running on beer. It was the paycheck, it was the water filter, it was the meal, it was the medicine, it was the prayer. Here's the sentence I want you to actually sit with. Alcohol didn't show up after we built the world we live in. There's a real, serious, scientifically argued possibility that it's the reason we built it at all. Not agriculture leading to beer, beer leading to agriculture. Not civilization producing beer as a fun little side effect. The craving for beer possibly being one of the engines that produced civilization in the first place. And here's the part that I think is actually kind of beautiful, if you let it be. Every single time you crack open a drink, beer, wine, a cocktail, whatever's in your hand right now, you are not doing some disconnected, isolated, modern little habit. You are the current, living link in a chain that is 10 million years long. The ingredients changed. The process got more refined. The cups definitely got fancier. I'm fairly confident nobody in Göbekli Tepe had a chilled pint glass. But the actual impulse, the little flicker in your brain that goes, yeah, this is nice, I want more of this, that is the exact same impulse that made a small, nameless primate reach down and pick up a piece of overripe fruit off a forest floor, 10 million years before anyone on Earth had a name for anything. We didn't invent that feeling. We just spent 10 million years figuring out how to make it on purpose, on demand, whenever we wanted it. So next time you're holding a drink and someone says something like, "Why do humans even like this stuff?" you now have a genuinely wild answer. You can tell them it might be the reason the pyramids exist. You can tell them it might be the reason humans stopped wandering around and started building permanent settlements. You can tell them their ancestors were doing this before they were technically human. And honestly, respect the streak. You're carrying on something that's outlasted empires, outlasted languages, outlasted entire species that came before us. If this blew your mind even a little bit, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because this channel is basically dedicated to digging up stories like this. Stuff that's hiding in plain sight, stuff you've done 1,000 times without ever knowing the insane history behind it. Drop a comment and tell me, knowing all this, does your next drink hit different? I actually want to know. And if you want to go deeper into any of this, the Drunken Monkey theory, Rockefet Cave, Göbekli Tepe, Patrick McGovern's research, all of it, I've linked the sources down in the description so you can fall down this rabbit hole yourself. Until next time, stay curious and drink responsibly. You've earned it. 10 million years in the making.